All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this new session of Xobin podcast. Today, I have with me Julie, and I'm really excited to talk to Julie. I have a dislike for the word influencer, so I'm not going to call her an HR influencer, but I'd like to call her a contributor because she's such a big contributor and community builder, whether it is Collab HR, Disrupt HR, HR for HR, HR at Hearts. We just had to have Julie on our show. So, Julie, thank you so much for coming to Xobin Talks. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Julie helps, just to give a brief introduction, Julie helps frustrated HR professionals get control of their careers. Uh, but Julie, like I ask every person who comes on this show, I'd like to ask you, how did you enter this particular field? Just give us a brief overview of that.
Okay, so the short answer to that question is that I was a disgruntled employee,
Okay.
and I had a bad experience with a manager,
Mhm.
and it kind of made me think differently about how employees have experiences in the workplace. And that kind of led me on my journey to discovering HR. So it wasn't like I set out when I was small to say, oh, when I grow up, I want to be in HR. I had a bad experience as an employee with a manager who I just felt like had he had better coaching, I think he would have dealt with my situation in a more humane way. And just working in an organization that had no HR representation whatsoever kind of took me on that journey. And so in working in different organizations, then I got to discover human resources, and I started to study it, and I realized that I liked it. And then I got my first role as an admin, and I worked my way through my HR career, coming out of corporate in a leadership role.
Mhm. That's interesting. So in this particular conversation, I think we're going to talk about high performance teams. We're going to talk about mental health, especially for HRs, given that you are an HR coach. We're going to talk about neurodiversity, and I guess we're also going to talk about diversity and inclusion. But
Mm-hmm.
the first question that I want to ask you is, you run a podcast which is HR Sound Off,
Yeah.
and the theme of that podcast is you kind of clear a few misconceptions in the field of HR.
Yes.
So, what are the top three misconceptions in the field of HR?
Okay. Every week I get lots of different misconceptions, and some of them are new to me. Some of them I'm very familiar with, but I would think that my top three would be that number one, HR is responsible for hiring and firing. We are not. We work with leaders. We try to get their feelings and their thoughts on a situation. We don't make the final decisions. We never do that. We can make recommendations. And a lot of times we would make recommendations that are contrary to the final result. And so I think for people to understand, when you think HR is just about hiring and firing, that's not what we're about. We don't even make the final decision when it comes to hiring. So
Yeah.
I think that's one misconception that I think needs to be made clear.
Mhm.
The second one I would say is that HR is not responsible for culture. Culture is everybody's business. It takes an entire organization to make a really good culture, and therefore HR can work with you to drive culture or culture activities or whatever that means for the organization, but they are not the sole responsible department for culture or building culture. So I think that when leaders try to put culture on HR, it really is a disservice, and you're setting HR up for failure. But if you say together, let's work on building the organization's culture, then collaboratively with HR, you can build a really great culture. And then the last one I would say is that HR is not responsible for employee performance. I think that it is every manager's responsibility. I always say to people, If it is that I am responsible for performance, then everyone should report to me, right? As
Mhm.
HR, everyone does not report to me, but they report to you as managers of different departments, and therefore you are responsible for their performance. So you are responsible for having the conversations around whether people feel engaged in their role, if they feel like they're being properly utilized in their role, and how to develop and grow your people. That's your responsibility. It is HR's responsibility to make sure you have the necessary tools and resources and processes to make that performance management process run smoothly, but it is not our responsibility to manage your employees' performance. That's totally on leadership. And those would be my top 3 misconceptions.
I'll probably double down on the second and the third one in this particular conversation. But continuing the conversation regarding culture, because that's the last
Yeah.
thing that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
You have often or HRs often get asked by the management that we want a high performance culture in our company.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your definition of a high performance team,
Mm-hmm.
and how does an HR help in creating and managing a high performance team?
That's a really good question. Again, I go back to an analogy that I've always heard growing up, which is that it takes a village to build it takes a village to raise a child. And I truly believe that organizations have the power to create great communities. And so within that framework, you can create high performing teams. But what everybody's different definition of a high performing team would be different. Is that a team that is creative? Is that a team that is meeting goals and expectations every single time? Is that a team that is embracing failure and creating psychological safety so that team members can feel free to speak and share ideas and share thoughts freely so that the team is able to achieve its goals? Is that a team that is feeling free to allow its people to move on when they have reached their peak within the team and they can no longer give, to that team in a way that is beneficial, so they have to move them on? I think all of those things are what helps to create a high performing team. There must be psychological safety. There must be trust. There must be a freedom to share ideas and to share feedback in an open and honest way. For me, those are the things that make a high performing team. People don't leave organizations, right? They leave bad managers.
Bad managers.
And
Yeah.
so if you have a good leader who is creating that psychological safety, building trust, allowing their team to work autonomously, all of those things help to create a high performing team. But I believe it takes a village, it takes a community, it takes great leaders, and it takes great people to make a high performing team.
I like the analogy. I think another analogy which comes to my mind is the high performance team is like an opera where everybody is playing a different instrument, but
the orchestra. Yeah,
it's an orchestra. When everything comes together, it's just music.
That's right. One band, one song.
Absolutely. But the moment one team or someone is not performing well, you'll immediately know about it, that there's something which is off.
Yes.
That's a really easy way of identifying whether the team is, high performing team or not.
And the truth of the matter is, even in an orchestra, and now you take me back to my childhood days of when I used to play the cello. But even in an orchestra, right, you have one member of the orchestra who is not playing well. Then you take them aside and you say, maybe you need to practice this particular area a bit more. But it's not just, okay, so this violinist isn't playing well, let's throw them out, right?
Right.
Again, you take the constructive criticism, you take the feedback, you embrace the failure, even though it may sound messy at first. It takes time for an orchestra to really perform well together and be synchronous, right? And a high performing team is just that they take their time, they build their way there. So if you think of like what it takes to build a team, you form, you storm, things norm and then you perform. And so in order for a high performing team, you have to go through that process. It will be messy, but it's okay. And if you have a good leader who can embrace all of that and help the team to get to that performing stage, then that's everybody wins, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You
Mm-hmm.
also mentioned an interesting point where one of the misconceptions was that HR is responsible for the team's performance.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's an absolute misconception.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
Typically in organizations, the HR will conduct or help conduct the performance appraisals or evaluation of employees' performance every 6 months or every year, and
Mm-hmm.
that's typically done on a bell curve. But I don't think a bell curve is going to work for a high performance team. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you go about even trying to evaluate or appraise a high performance team? How does that work?
Consistently reviewing performance. And I think it's a two-way street. Number one, I absolutely hate when I hear people say we get reviews once a year.
Mm.
That's crazy, because to my mind, how do you even know that you are waiting an entire year to know what's gone wrong? In a lot of organizations, that happens. You're waiting an entire year to find out what's gone wrong. That's the time that most managers will bring out their little black book of all the mistakes that you've made that you never heard about during the course of the year.
True.
And that definitely is not how you run a high performing team. Consistent review is necessary. And I always recommend quarterly reviews.
Okay.
But then I still would say, try to meet with your team at the end of every project that you work on together and do a retrospective. Good leaders will always ask the question, what did I do enough of, or what didn't I do enough of to support you in this particular exercise? What could I have done better? Because good leaders are vulnerable, and they were willing to take that feedback on to see how they can do better and help their team improve. And once you open up and give your team the psychological safety to do that, then I find that good leaders will learn, teams will thrive that way. But I think the feedback has to be more than once a year or every 6 months. And I start off with saying, let's do quarterly reviews. But I also think that stay interviews are very important. So while you're managing performance on a quarterly basis, at least checking in with your team maybe every 3 weeks to every month within the quarter, at the end of every month within a quarter, which is when I do it for my team. I would check in with them and just say, what are you enjoying about working with me, with the organization? What are you not enjoying? What things could we do better? Do you feel like your skills are being properly utilized? And if not, which skills do you think you need to develop a bit more? And how can I support you in doing that? And then also, like, any feedback for me. What do you think I'm doing well? What do you think I'm not doing well? Where do you think I could improve as a leader? And asking those questions and making sure that people are feeling, that you really value their feedback and making the necessary changes. I feel it's so much easier to make change when you catch a situation early, and you get that feedback early versus waiting an entire year and the person is probably on the verge of, look, I'm ready to leave this place because this is bananas. I think that that's the best time. If you're consistently getting that feedback, is very important. So if you can tap into your team once a month and then, deal with the performance process on a quarterly basis, I feel that's how you really, the winning combination to me, in terms of making sure that you're running a high performing team effectively. And then be intentional when they tell you what's not working. Be intentional about fixing that if you can fix it. Be intentional about it. Get it done. And the faster you can fix it, the better for you. But definitely annual reviews, organizations who are still doing that, please just stop it. Even, meeting every 6 months, you've got to be more consistent. You've got to get in front of your people and understand what their challenges are.
I think that's the key word, consistency. I mean, that's the key word. And that's where most of the organizations face the trouble. You said okay, let's do a check-in every month, and probably let's connect every quarter,
Yep.
as part of, checking where you are on your performance.
Yep.
Companies are going to do that for maybe 2 quarters or 3 quarters, and then uh, they're not going to
Stop.
do.
Yes.
It's going to
And
stop.
that's where HR comes in. That's where HR comes in and says, have you done your monthly check-in with your team members? Have you done your quarterly review? And what's working well? What's not working well? Where can HR help you close some of those gaps? How can we support you? Should we, do you want us to schedule it so that you make sure it's done and it's on the books? Because so many times employees will come back and say they haven't had their review, and you go, what? So how can we hold you accountable? That's where HR can collaborate and support you.
I think that's the key. I mean, that's where
Yeah.
the HR needs to hold the team accountable.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
I also want to take some learnings from your experience, because you mentioned that your career has been in HR reverse direction, where you started with helping employees, and now you are helping HRs themselves as an
Yeah.
HR coach.
Mm-hmm.
The past 3 years has been very rough, especially for people from the HR community.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, you had a hiring freeze, and then you had to work with COVID and remote working. A lot of that pressure came on HR teams.
Yep.
And because you are an HR coach, what's
Mm-hmm.
been the mental condition for most of these HRs? What's the problem that they're facing today?
So it's a threefold problem. Well,
Okay.
a lot of times people think that it's just burnout. And I heard this word flying around a lot during the pandemic, which was,
Right.
people are burned out, HR people are burned out, but it's not just burnout. HR people struggle with burnout. Yes, that is one, but burnout is something that happens as stress is extended over a longer period of time. Before you get to the burnout phase, you experience the compassion fatigue, which is that lack of interest, lack of energy to support people. And that's when you as an HR professional get to this space where you're like, just let them do whatever they want. Just let the organization burn. Let it burn, because your ability to care about anything, any decisions that are being made or they're not being made with you in the room, your ability to care about that anymore is just at zero, right? So there's compassion fatigue. Then you also have trauma, right? HR is the punching bag of the organization. HR is the scapegoat of the organization. If leaders can pass off bad decisions, they pass it off on HR 99. And they will leave HR to deliver those messages and communicate those messages, and then leave people to think that it was an HR decision when it wasn't. And I know that there are some brave HR people who will say, not me, they're not doing that to me, but there are more HR people that allow that to happen to them than there are HR people who don't. And so a lot of times we are dealing with trauma that comes with those particular situations that we have to deal with. In addition to that, as you said before, a lot of times HR professionals are the adjunct therapist for the organization. And a lot of times we are hearing things, experiencing things that no human being should ever have to say, is that they're being sexually abused or sexually harassed, or they're being bullied, or they're going through a domestic violence issue personally. We hear everything. We hear so many different things. And then on top of that, we experience a lot of things. If an employee dies, the communication around that to not only employees, but family members. If an employee is terminated and the termination doesn't go well, sometimes there are domestic issues that spill out from the home into the workplace, and HR is the person that's usually asked to deal with that. There's so much trauma in HR. It really is a very difficult space for HR professionals to be. So I would say, so for me, I call it the trifecta of, mental health challenges that HR professionals can face.
Mhm.
You're not just burned out, you can also experience compassion fatigue, and you can also experience trauma, your own personal trauma, and then vicarious trauma, meaning the trauma of others passing it on to you and sharing their stories and their experiences. And as a result of that, HR is tired. They're tired, they're frustrated, and they're done. And a lot of HR professionals have chosen my clients. I work with a lot of HR people, and a lot of times I'm working with people who are trying to navigate themselves out of HR
Absolutely.
versus
Yeah.
a lot of times my clients are trying to navigate themselves out of HR into something else, or they're trying to build a career around something that they actually love to do that's HR specific. In other words, they don't want to be a generalist anymore, but they want to be a specialist. And so I help them navigate how to become a specialist or how to start their consultancy. Some HR professionals who have been in consultancy space also want to navigate coming back into the corporate space because I call it the crazy. They miss the crazy. And so they want to navigate themselves back into the space. So I'm helping HR professionals at every angle or every stage of their career.
I speak to so many HR folks every month, and one overarching theme that I have seen is that uh, there's a feeling of being stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of touched upon that
Yeah.
because they see other people in the organization. Let's say someone joins in the sales team. They join as a sales associate, and then they move to a sales manager and the director, and then probably VP of sales.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing for marketing, same thing for technology. But in HR, it's you tend to move zigzag sideways rather than moving up, which
Yeah.
adds to the feeling of, hey, I think I'm stuck in this particular profession.
Yeah.
What do you have to say to people who feel that they are stuck and their career is just moving sideways but not really moving ahead? What do you have
Yeah.
to tell for them?
So I think a lot of times in HR, we create paths or career paths for the rest of the organization, but we don't create them for ourselves.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
the first question I always ask people is, do you have a career path? Is it built out for you in your organization to tell you how do you move from one level to the next? And do you have the competency frameworks in place to help you understand what competencies and skills are necessary to transition you from one role to the next? 99% of the time, the answer is no, they don't have that. So the reason that you're stuck a lot of time is because you've caused yourself to feel stuck. Then the other thing is, well, are you having the conversations with your leadership around what this role should map out and look like? Some people say yes, some people say no. Again, it's around perception. Everyone's perception is their reality. Sometimes leaders' perception of HR is based on the one elective that they took in their master's.
Yeah.
Right? I did an elective in HR, therefore I know HR, and this is what it should be. No. And you're the expert. So you're the one that needs to tell your leadership what HR should look like for the organization. They don't question sales. They don't question marketing. They don't question finance when they're telling them about the resources and tools and people that they need and why certain processes should be done this way or that way or the other way. But they always question HR because they feel that they have a specific perception of what HR is and what it looks like. But the truth of the matter is you're the expert and you need to tell them, like everybody else, what it looks like and what should be in place to help you navigate your career forward. Now, if of course you have all of that stuff in place, but you still feel like you're going nowhere in the organization, then the question is the right organization for you. Yeah. And then sometimes it means you have to make a tough decision about moving on because if you have a specific idea and vision for your career to be moved into a specific way. If you are stuck at HR business partner, but you want to be an HR director, and there's no forward motion in that organization for you because they tell you they're flat or whatever reason they give you for why they can't move you forward, then the conversation needs to be, well, okay, if I can't move into XYZ role, how can you help me build these particular competencies? How can you help me? That's the conversation you need to have. How can you help me? And if they say we can't help you, then you know, okay, well, let me move on. And find the organization that is willing to help me develop those skills so I can be in the role that I envision for my HR career.
So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think last week and the week before that, we were speaking with Daniela. She's a DEI professional,
Mm-hmm.
but you come from a different perspective, and you were speaking about neurodiversity. So
Yeah.
can you tell our audience what is neurodiversity and how does it fit into this entire schema of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Mm-hmm.
Just give us a brief idea about it.
So neurodiversity is about how our brains work and how our brain helps us to make those contributions to the workplace or to life in general.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are neurotypical, which means, they're normal, essentially. Okay. But then you have people like me who are neurodivergent. So I have attention deficit disorder, ADHD,
Okay.
or ADD. And then you have people who are on the autism spectrum. And then you have people who have things like dyslexia, or they have speech impediments like Tourette's. Though generally, these are the people that would make up the neurodiverse category in the workplace. And the question becomes, how do we navigate so that we can employ and get the best out of our neurodivergent employees? Mm-hmm. That's in essence what we mean when we talk about neurodiversities, and how do we embrace those neurodiversities to help us employ people in the workforce who have these neurodiversities so that we can get the best products, services in our organization. A lot of times people shy away from hiring, especially people on the autism spectrum.
True.
Because there are certain behaviors that they don't know how to navigate in the workplace. But I put that to educating yourself, your workforce, and working with organizations that actually help you to recruit people who are especially on the autism spectrum. So you know what questions to ask them in the interview to get them to draw them out. And then when you hire them, that will help you to find ways to adjust the workspace to get the best out of them.
This is interesting, and we like to double down on both of them. So let's assume that there is someone who's coming from a neurodiverse background. Tell us, how should the ideal recruitment be designed? Recruitment process, I'm sure, needs to be modified to suit these unique requirements.
Yeah.
How should that happen? Give us an idea or a sense of that. And you also mentioned the second point is you need to change the workplace or the work environment to suit these people. So we like to discuss deeper on that part as well.
Sure. So let's say, for example, well, let me start from the beginning. Studies show that people who are on the autism spectrum have a better attention to detail. They're also more creative as well. So if you, for example, are looking to fill a role that requires serious attention to detail, whether that's finance or coding, something in that space where attention to detail is absolutely necessary, someone on the autism spectrum would definitely do a better job than someone who is neurotypical. Now, you may not necessarily outrightly know how to hire someone who is on the autism spectrum, but there are organizations that exist who have learned this process that you could learn from. For example, Hewlett Packard, Microsoft, they all work with organizations that specialize in helping them to recruit persons who are on the autism spectrum. So those organizations also help you with creating the questions that you need to ask or the exercises that you would need to put in place to help that person get through the interview process. Then again, an education needs to take place within the organization for when that person is hired to help people understand what those people like, what persons on the autism spectrum like and what they don't like. For example, some people don't like to be touched. So it's important to help you understand, okay, so we're hiring this person, they're going to be on XYZ team. Here are a couple of things we need to know about this person. So it's almost like a cultural onboarding to understanding a neurodiverse person. They don't like a lot of bright lights, hence we're locating them in this space. They don't like a lot of bright colors, and hence we're going to be doing some painting to dub down the space. So it's are we willing to make those necessary sacrifices? Well, the benefit of doing that and having that understanding and doing that is, how does that help our bottom line? We're getting someone who has a greater attention to detail, who may even move a lot faster than a neurotypical employee, and will be able to help us, improve our profits as a result. Same thing with someone who has attention deficit disorder. Is kind of understanding you need to put them on projects that will keep them moving, that will keep them interested, will keep them engaged, and know when to pull them back. Because for us as people with ADHD, we can go down lots of different rabbit holes, but we're very creative people. We can get easily distracted. It's almost like a dog with a bone with some of us.
The shiny new object syndrome.
Yes, shiny new object syndrome, right? And so it's very important to understand how to manage that behavior. So it's always about educating, but we shouldn't hold back from hiring such people because we're afraid of what the outcome would be. We think about the success that will come as a result of recruiting neurodiverse talent and helping them to help the organization succeed. But you got to create the environment, which means educating your workforce and then making any necessary aesthetic changes that you need to make to the office to make them feel comfortable in their space, and making sure that people are aware of the behaviors that they need to exhibit around neurodiverse people, but especially, I would say, on the autism spectrum as well.
It's interesting you were talking about attention to detail, because in our platform, we help run skill assessments. And one of the skills is attention to detail. Yep. We launched that probably, if I'm not wrong, 12 months ago. And across every role, I mean, you won't believe it, whether it's technology, whether it's finance, it's most used in payroll related hiring. Every single company which has used my platform for the past 12 years, hiring for an HR or a payroll position, has used attention to detail as one of the skills in their tests. And now it all makes sense that, okay, a person from an autistic background can probably do well, or that's one of the traits which is required. So now I'm trying to connect the dots backwards. But it was great talking. I think this was very interesting, a learning session for me as well, Julie. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And I really look forward to having a more detailed session, I think, around neurodiversity. Maybe we could schedule it sometime towards the end of this year, where we like to talk in depth about neurodiversity, about hiring and managing candidates coming from a diverse background. So I think this is really interesting. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.